welcome to another episode of the Acid Trash Jamboree, where we discuss strange music and movies. Okay, so here we are with part 2 of this incredible string band overview. If you haven't yet checked out part 1, feel free to do so if you have a spare minute or 15. In this video I'll be talking about the band's years on Island Records, during which time they put out 5 full-length albums, as well as a couple of singles. Mike Heron and Robin Williamson also released their debut solo albums in this period, so I'll touch on those too. Then I'll finish by going through the few retrospective compilations I have, so please stick around. First, a quick word about a change in the ISB's lineup. Rose Simpson, who had been an official member since Changing Horses in 1969, actually left the band after the U album and was replaced by Malcolm LeMaistre, the leader of the Stone Monkey dance group, who you'll recall had collaborated with the string band on that very project. Rose still features on the first Island effort though, Be Glad for the Song Has No Ending, which I have here on a double CD with Liquid Acrobat as regards the air. Now Be Glad is partially a cupboard clearing type of a release, with outtakes from We Tam and the Big Huge, Changing Horses and I Looked Up, finally seeing the light of day, as well as being a soundtrack to this film, which is very much a film of two halves. The first half comprises of documentary and concert footage from around 1968, when the band were at the peak of their popularity. Then the second half is something else altogether. A colourful, surreal, dialogue-free drama piece, I suppose, entitled The Pirate and the Crystal Ball, with the band members dressed in strange outfits, prancing about in nature and generally being a bit weird. When I first saw this section, I was still fairly young, and I wrote it off as being nonsensical, self-indulgent twaddle, basically. Though looking at it now, quite like it. I mean, it's not exactly up to Alejandro Jodorowsky standards or anything, but if you like that psychedelic hippie era of filmmaking, then you may get something out of it. Okay, on to the music. The Be Glad album itself is actually excellent, especially the first half with the outtakes. Robin's songs Come With Me and Vishengro in particular are wonderful, pretty much as strong as anything else he produced around that time, for me anyway. Though his music hall, kind of kinksy, knees up, Waiting For You, outstays its welcome a little at 7 minutes. The sixth track, or the B-side on the original LP, is taken up by the 9 instrumental pieces that play over the Pirate and the Crystal Ball segment of the film. These cover a whole range of moods: playful, mysterious, dissonant, and then in the midst of it all there's a reprise of Beyond the Sea from We Tam. Okay, on to Liquid Acrobat as regards the air, the first proper Island album and the first one to feature Malcolm in the lineup. Now, whilst he didn't write any of the songs here, he did prove himself as quite the multi-instrumentalist and pleasant vocalist too. He's received a lot of flack down the years from the old string band purists, but I actually like his contributions a fair bit. Anyway, the band had been flirting a little bit with rock stylings and instrumentation on the last 2 Elektra albums, though here it's a lot more to the fore. Several of the tunes feature loud electric guitars and drums. The most effective ones of these are probably Robin's Dear Old Battlefield, which is quite the folk rock classic in my books, and then you've got Mike's Painted Chariot, which gets quite cooking actually at the end. The real masterpieces here, though, are Robin's bookending songs, Talking of the End and Darling Belle. 2 very complex, multi-part compositions. These harken back to the Elektra era, but they're perhaps a little bit more mature and polished sounding. So, a great album overall, with just a couple of novelty misfires. These are easy enough to overlook, I think. An extra bit of trivia for you: the featured drummer here is Jerry Conway, who's played with literally everyone down the years. Jethro Tull, Fotheringay, Al Stewart, Sheila MacDonald, Fairport Convention, and many, many, many more. And speaking of Fairport, the ISB chuck in the obligatory medley of traditional jigs on this album, which became the done thing in folk rock circles after Liege and Leaf. On to Earthspan from 1972. Another really solid one overall. Malcolm opens the album with the stirring folk rocker My Father Was a Lighthouse Keeper. He actually wrote 3 of the songs here, though this is the strongest one. It's probably my favourite of his ISB contributions overall. Some spirited backing vocals from the others and some nice kind of chordal twists and turns. And now a couple of Robbins numbers. They've got a curious kind of jazzy feel to them. Restless Night and Moon Hang Low. Though the one that gets me is Banks of Sweet Italy. Very wistful, almost traditional sounding folk song, which is just gorgeous. For once, Mike gets the most writing credits, a whopping 4, including a Sunday Song, which is a co-write with Licky, actually. Now, this is a strange one. At its core, it's very dramatic and epic piano ballad with big booming drums that also chucks in these kind of bleak, depressing chamber music sections and weird, angular, kind of modern classical breakdowns. Not at all what you'd expect from the string band, but it kind of works. Another strange one is the closer, Seagull, which is also pretty all over the place, but closer in spirit to the earlier material. Ends on a rousing sing-along. You have to wonder if this album and its predecessor would be better known today if they'd been released by a different band, basically. But unfortunately, seems they'll always be judged against and overshadowed, really, by what came before. No Ruinous Feud was next, and it was the first one since the departure of Licky. It wasn't the last we heard of her, though, as she was part of several other bands and projects after she left the ISB. She even popped up on Journey's Edge, which is the excellent first album by Robin's Merry Band, which was put out in 1977, though sadly, as is well documented, she hasn't been heard from or seen since around the late 80s and is considered a missing person. But back to the string band. No Ruinous Feud, generally regarded as the band's nadir. Certainly compared to what had gone before it, it's the patchiest one, and the one that sounds least like their other material. Though checking it out again recently, I have to say it's not that bad. There are touches of kind of reggae and calypso here, like on Mike's strong opener, Explorer, and the cover of Duke Reid's Second Fiddle. Whilst Malcolm kind of brings in a country flavour. It's a quite nice effect on Down Before Cathay, which is a fine song. I'm not so sure about the Dolly Parton cover, though. And speaking of low points, a couple of Robin songs are particularly dodgy. Circus Girl and Weather the Storm. That said, it's Saturday Maybe, which is very obviously about an extramarital affair, not sure whose, is a real gem with a mellow, kind of orchestrated soft rock feel, kind of reminiscent of the kind of thing Roy Harper and Andy Roberts were doing around about the same time, so that's a nice one. Okay, so the string band's final studio album was this one, 1974's Hard Rope and Silken Twine, which is an improvement on the previous offering in terms of songwriting, but feels somewhat disjointed as an overall listening experience. Now, Mike Heron absolutely dominates things here, to the point where you wonder if the other members even cared anymore. That said, Robin's 2 songs at least are strong. Dreams of No Return in particular is great, harkening back to the classic sound, sitar and all, as well as pointing the way forward to what he would do with the Merry Band a bit later in the 70s. Whilst Cold February is a poignant song about war, which is instrumentally similar to The Circle is Unbroken from a few years previously. Though for some reason the band chose to include quite a rough sounding live recording in place of a proper studio take, which is a decision that's always baffled me. Again, maybe they just couldn't be bothered to do one. Elsewhere, there's a pronounced soft rock feel to the album, with Mike's opener, Maker of Islands, and Malcolm's Glance in Love, which was actually a co-write with David Bowie's keyboard player, Mike Garson. Again, you might not necessarily expect this type of material from the ISB, though I suppose if you like that type of mushy mid-70s sound in general, then these have something to offer. Okay, so that just leaves Ithkos, which at 19 minutes was the longest song that the band ever did. This one was mostly written by Mike, though the little opening section is Robin's, and actually most of the lead vocal work was done by Malcolm. It's mostly quite slowly paced, again with some kind of soft rock sections, a few funkier bits, orchestrated passages. There's even a glam rock section towards the end with fuzzy lead guitar and stuff. Plus you even get a bit of synthesizer twiddling, which would have been unheard of a few years previously. Truth be told, if you're really into your prog rock like me, then you'll have heard better sidelong epics in your time, but there's still much to enjoy on this one. Okay, so that marks the end of the ISB's original run. As is well documented, the split was rather acrimonious, unfortunately, but we won't dwell on that. Instead, let's jump back to 1971 and take a look at this. Smiling Men with Bad Reputations, Mike's first solo album. This is perhaps most famous for how many heavyweight guest musicians that he and producer Joe Boyd managed to cram on there. As a record, it's a mixed bag, both in terms of style and quality. It opens well, though, with the bright and breezy Call Me Diamond, and then the laid-back Flowers of the Forest, though it's not really until Spirit Beautiful that I, personally anyway, can hear anything that equals his best work with the string band. And actually, this particular song would have fitted quite nicely onto any of the LPs from their classic period. Warm Heart Pastry is a funny one. It's a song with Pete Townsend and Keith Moon guesting, who pretty much just hijack the thing and turn it into a Who song. Mike more than holds his own on the vocals, though. Then you've got Beautiful Stranger. This is a fairly droning, experimental kind of thing, which also recalls the string band, though they're more indulgent stuff on this one. Then you've got No Turning Back, which closes the album on quite a sparse and poignant note. Actually, the more I hear Smiling Men, the more it grows on me, though personally it will always be overshadowed by this. Robin's Myrrh, which I bought for next to nothing about 20 years ago now, not knowing what to expect at all, and it absolutely blew me away. It's not quite as stylistically varied as Mike's first solo album, but it still mixes things up a little bit with tinges of country and folk rock on a couple of the songs. The main body of the album, though, is made up of moody, oftentimes dark acoustic songs, some which have these like bleak chamber arrangements, which touch on kind of medieval and early music, which gives them a distinct kind of wintry and pagan atmosphere, which I love. Opener Strings in the Earth and Air is a setting of a James Joyce poem with music composed by Ivan Powell from Dr. Strangely Strange, who were friends of the string band. Robin's version absolutely sets the tone of Myrrh perfectly, and it just gets better from there. Will We Open the Heavens, Cold Harbour, Dark-Eyed Lady, just masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece. And of course you've got the dancing of the Lord of Weir, which is extra freaky and pretty much has to be heard to be believed. I've long seen this album as kind of a companion piece to Liquid Acrobat, particularly that album's more kind of reflective and melancholic moments. Though for me, Myrrh is even better, and it's actually one of my favourite albums ever, probably, at this point. Okay, so before we finish, just a quick word about some of the retrospective compilations that I have. The Circle is Unbroken as the first one. This brings together two previously released sets, the Chelsea Sessions 1967, which comprises of demos recorded prior to the 5,000 Spirits. You've got early versions of classics from that LP on here, plus a bunch of songs that the band left off it, most of which were never revisited, but these are definitely worth a listen. Then on disc 2, you've got some pretty patchy and rather low-fidelity live recordings from 1972, which originally came out in a slightly different form in the 90s as First Girl I Loved. Again, there are pieces here that never made it onto the band's studio LPs, but it's not top drawer material by any means, and some of the rejigs of their older material are pretty horrible. Across the Airwaves, however, is much more like it. This one's actually an absolute treasure trove. It comprises all of the BBC Radio 1 Live in Concert album and most of the on-air radio sessions collection. Plus, you get 13 tracks that had previously only been available on unofficial bootlegs. The 1971-72 concert material is captured really wonderfully. The version of The Circle is Unbroken is really, really haunting and kind of spectral almost. They also have a stab at Darling Bell, and it's nice to hear a string band version of Spirit Beautiful from Smiling Men. Funnily enough, they do Beautiful Stranger on disc 2 as well. Speaking of the unreleased stuff, here there's gems like Robin's Fine Fingered Hands and Ring Dance. You've got Licky and Mike's Secret Temple and Long Long Road, which was one of the songs from the U show that never made it onto the actual album. So overall, yeah, a really fantastic set, which is unfortunately out of print these days. Okay, so that just leaves Tricks of the Senses, which features rare recordings from both the Elektra and the Island eras. Again, you've got a bunch of radio session tracks here. These ones are from 1968, and among them they feature a setting of Robin's poem The Head, which you can read in full inside the Wee Tam and the Big Huge sleeve. Disc 2 is where all the real gems are for me, though. You've got a couple of live recordings actually from the U show. There's a few instrumental pieces, a studio take of Secret Temple from the Earthspan sessions. Plus you've got the epic multi-part Queen Juanita, which was previously only available on Seasons They Change, which was a vinyl retrospective released in around 1976. Okay, so that's the end of this ISB Odyssey. Hope it's been at least a little bit interesting. Maybe if you're new to the band, I hope it's inspired you to check out some of their stuff. Or if you're already familiar with them, maybe you've dug out the old LPs and listened to them in a new light. So yes, thank you for listening, and hopefully I'll see you again soon on the next instalment of the Acid Trash Jamboree.